Hey there, I'm Kylie with Homeowning 101, and today I'm going to be breaking down the viral Barbara Corcoran snippet that sparked tons of controversy. And although what she said may sound crazy for some, it definitely holds a lot of truth and value to it. But it's hard to catch the nuances of what she said in such a short clip, so that's why I'm breaking it down today. Now I'll run the clip for context.
The best time to buy your first home is as early as you can get in it. Don't wait for the right home on the right block in the right town. Just do the best you can and get your foot in. And the reason for that is real estate prices always go up and down, but most of the time they're going up. And you need something to trade with. If you want that really beautiful house high up on the hill, you have 10 times more shot of getting there eventually if you buy that dirt cheap studio in an upcoming neighborhood that you can get a quick gain on. Because you have a trading card. Then you trade in for a 1-bedroom. And maybe you trade that 1-bedroom for 2 bedrooms. Then you get that big house on the hill.
All right, now that first sentence alone ruffles a lot of feathers. Let's review it real quick.
The best time to buy your first home is as early as you can get in it.
So before I get to the main points that I want to make about this, there are a few caveats that we should address about this statement alone. Now, many of you get this already, but a lot of people seem to assume that she was saying every 18-year-old and college student should go out and buy a house. That's not necessarily what she meant, because as early as you can get in it might mean young for some people and later for others, because not every 18 or 25-year-old will be able to get into a house. Now, that said, qualifying for a house and affording one are two very different things. And Barbara basically alludes to this later on when she says, buy the cheapest thing that you can. More details on that coming up. But the implication was that you can afford it. Because with qualifying, the bank will qualify you for as much as they possibly can. They want you to max out your budget because the bigger the loan that you take out with them, the more money they make off of you in interest in the long run. So it is your responsibility to determine what you can afford. And I'll have videos on that coming up as well. So with those little caveats out of the way, let's run that statement again so that I can get to the main points that I actually wanted to make about this.
The best time to buy your first home is as early as you can get in it.
So as she says later in this video, the market is always increasing. And this is what that looks like. So this graph is from the US Census Bureau, and it's the median sales prices for houses by year from present day back until before the 70s. So basically what you want to think of is each one of these points is the price of the most average house in the United States for that year. As you can see, it's basically almost always increasing. Let's say it's the year 2000 and you just want to buy the most average house in your area. Keep in mind, this is also for like the most average area. If you live way out in the boonies or in an area where the population is decreasing, your home probably won't follow the average growth pattern that's shown in this graph. Also, if you live in a highly desirable area, your appreciation will likely happen a lot faster. For my area, Orange County, our condos basically follow this graph and these prices. So as you can imagine, our median home prices are much, much higher at basically 1.1 million. So again, this is if you're living in the most average area, and I will have a video later that will help you determine how to read your own personal market. So like and subscribe to stick around for that. Now let's continue. Let's say it's the year 2000 and you're not very interested in buying a house yet, but you know that you just want to buy the most average one. Now let's say you could have afforded it in 2000, but for whatever reason, you decided to wait 5 years. That most average home ended up being $50,000 more. So because housing prices are always increasing, you will almost always pay more for the same house if you wait. So in other words, the earliest you can buy it is likely the cheapest you'll be able to get it for. Now, if you can't afford a house, that's okay. Waiting is definitely okay because you don't want to put yourself in a financial situation that you can't afford. However, considering that the median asking price for rent is constantly increasing as well, this is also information from the US Census Bureau. I'll have the links down below, but I pulled this information and put it into my own graph so that it was easier to view. But as you can see, the longer you wait, the more rent prices also increase, making it harder to save. Not to mention that inflation of just about everything else also kills your budget. Now, there are a lot of people who tell me that renting is so much cheaper than buying. But a lot of people that tell me that are renting a studio apartment and are comparing it to buying a house, which is not the equivalent comparison. What would make sense is to compare it to a studio condo. And yes, still buying a studio condo may be more expensive at the moment or in any given present time. However, it will likely cost the same eventually. And even further, rent will eventually surpass your mortgage. Now, let me show you what I mean. So let's say this is rent over time. Let's say this is a mortgage. So when I say a mortgage right here, what I mean is the market price that you took out a loan that year. And in this graph, we'll say that we're comparing rent for a studio apartment versus a mortgage on a studio condo. And of course, a mortgage is going to be higher than rent. This isn't always the case though. Back in 2019, when I was still renting a 2-bedroom apartment, I actually could have bought a condo for only 5% down and would have had a mortgage that was actually $100 less than what I was currently paying for rent. Now let's say that studio apartment costs $2,000, right? And let's say that mortgage for a studio condo would be $2,500. An extra $500 per month definitely sucks. Maybe not specifically $500, but let's just say at any point in time, 2019, same thing. It's the same distance, $500. However, let's say that you bought that studio condo in 2024 with a fixed rate mortgage. That means that you committed to paying $2,500 every month until the term of the loan, which is usually in about 30 years. Guess what that means? In 5 years, 2029, you're still paying $2,500. 5 years later, 10 years. And 5 years after that, you're still paying $2,500. So for the next 30 years, that's how much you're paying. So now thinking back to 2024, when rent prices were $2,000, 5 years later, they kept increasing. And now look, your mortgage is the same as rent. Now let's keep that going another 5 years to 2034. Rent is now, let's hypothetically say $3,000. But guess what? If you would have bought in 2024, you are still paying $2,500. So although it may have taken a long time to get there, now before you think, I have to stay in home 10 years before the savings actually make a difference, not quite. It might be like that for your first home because you don't start with any equity, but from that first home that you buy, you actually can and should, in my opinion, carry the equity with you to your next home and the home after that. I'll be explaining it in further detail later in the video, but essentially bringing that equity with you allows you to get a much cheaper monthly payment throughout the years so that you can continue to pay further and further below market price in comparison to rent over time. You are now saving $500 per month, and the year after that, it will eventually be $600 per month, and you'll be saving $700 per month the year after that. Obviously, that's if rent keeps on continuing. These numbers are obviously hypothetical, but that is the pattern that these last few years have followed. So that said, the earlier you get into a home, the cheaper you'll pay for that house in most cases, and the earlier you'll stop paying market price for rent. Now let's let Barb continue.
Don't wait for the right home on the right block in the right town.
So let's go back to the median home prices. That right home on the right block usually isn't just your average house. It's probably a nice one. So let's say it's 1995 and that home is going to be $200,000. Let's say you can't afford that house yet. It's going to take you some promotions, it's going to take some saving, and all of that's going to take time. So if it's going to take 5 to 10 years to get to that dream home, we'll compromise and say 7. And now, after all that hard work, you can now afford a $200,000 house. If you look at what's happened with home prices, the average home is now $200,000, meaning you can just afford average. That dream home you had your eyes set on is now $300,000. Now let's replay this and kind of implement the strategy that Barb's talking about. So let's say you bought that average house in 1995 and you still continued to save for that dream home. Well, guess what? Each of those mortgage payments goes towards paying down your equity. Although you do throw away some money in interest and taxes, a portion of that money goes towards paying down your principal every single month and paying off your loan. And that's money that you'll get back when you sell your home. On top of that, over the last 7 years, your home has appreciated in value and is now worth $75,000 more. And the appreciation is profit. Now you will have to subtract closing costs, and there likely would have been maintenance. But on top of your saving, you now have a home to cash out on. So just on savings and renting alone, you were only able to afford the average house. But now, since you have a home to sell in addition to your savings and all of your promotions, you now have a much bigger down payment from cashing out on your house so that you can afford something like $300,000. So if you put down a $100,000 down payment, you're now only checking out a loan for $200,000 from the bank, which you can afford. Now, a few more points from Barb.
Just do the best you can and get your foot in. And the reason for that is real estate prices always go up and down, but most of the time they're going up.
So now that said, I like to think of real estate as a long-term game because as you can see, the prices are increasing in the long run. If you zoom in, so in the span of a couple years, the prices are always going up and down. So if you're trying to move houses and play the real estate game, it might work for you if you do the short-term game that Barb talks about in just a minute. But to me, with this kind of investment, especially since you live in it, it's better to be safe than sorry. So my advice would be to look at it in the long term and to be prepared to stay in your house if you have to, especially if there's a crash, which is going to be in my next video. Now, if you want to keep an eye on the short-term market and see if your property has appreciated quicker than you might think, that can be a great thing to do to get you where you want to be even faster. But when you first buy your home, having the mindset that you might get stuck there longer than you may anticipate is always a good idea in my opinion. So like how I explained with the hypothetical graph a few moments ago, Barb's going to get into trading up, but there are some better points that I want to make in addition to her explanation.
And you need something to trade with.
All right, now let's move on to part 2 that has the really, really good stuff in it.